Some doors are sealed to imprison monsters. Others are sealed because the truth inside would change every soul who dared to hear it. For 700 years, the Hall of Origins had welcomed kings, scholars, priests, and travelers from every corner of the kingdom, yet not a single person had ever questioned the enormous stone coffin resting beneath the towering statues of the ancient wolves. Children were taught that the first Alpha had entered eternal rest after saving the kingdom from a forgotten darkness. Elders repeated the same story until it became as familiar as the sunrise. Every flower placed beside the sacred coffin honored a legend that no one believed would ever speak again. Claire Bennett never imagined she would become the first person to discover that legends sometimes waited patiently for someone willing to listen. At 22 years old, Claire had spent most of her life unnoticed. As an Omega, she was rarely invited into grand ceremonies or important discussions. She quietly accepted the simple responsibility of caring for the Hall of Origins every morning before the palace awakened. Long before the royal guards changed shifts and long before the scholars opened their scrolls, Claire arrived carrying a small basket filled with freshly gathered white lilies. She preferred arriving before dawn because the sacred hall felt peaceful when no voices disturbed its silence. The towering stone pillars stretched high above her like ancient trees, while soft golden light filtered through stained glass windows, painting gentle colors across the polished marble floor. Massive wolf statues watched over the chamber with calm expressions that somehow felt protective rather than intimidating. Claire carefully removed yesterday's flowers before arranging the fresh lilies beside the enormous coffin. She smiled softly as she straightened the final stem. "Another beautiful morning," she whispered, although no one stood nearby to hear her. She always spoke to the hall as though it were alive. Perhaps that was why she noticed things other people overlooked. As she turned to collect her empty basket, a sound echoed through the vast chamber. Knock. Claire froze. Her heartbeat quickened as she slowly looked back toward the ancient coffin. The hall became perfectly still once again. She waited several seconds before quietly laughing at herself. Old buildings often settled during cool mornings. That was all it had been. She lifted the basket once more. Knock. Knock. This time the sound was unmistakable. 3 slow knocks came from somewhere inside the enormous stone coffin. Claire stared without blinking. Every story she had ever heard insisted the coffin had remained sealed for 7 centuries. No one had opened it. No one had heard anything from within it. The silence returned, heavier than before. She cautiously stepped closer until she stood only a few feet away. The polished stone looked exactly as it always had. Ancient silver carvings covered the lid, each symbol worn smooth by time, but still beautiful beneath the morning light. She reached out slowly, her fingers trembling with uncertainty before gently touching the cool surface. The stone was not cold. It was warm. Claire immediately pulled her hand away in surprise. She looked around the enormous hall, expecting to find one of the palace attendants playing a harmless joke. The chamber remained completely empty. Even the birds that usually sang outside the stained glass windows had fallen strangely silent. Her curiosity quietly overcame her fear. She stepped forward again and rested both hands against the ancient stone. "Is someone there?" she asked, feeling foolish the moment the words escaped her lips. Several long seconds passed. Nothing happened. Claire lowered her head, embarrassed by her own imagination. Then, just as she began to step away, a calm voice rose from beneath the stone with remarkable clarity, gentle enough to sound almost like a memory carried by the wind. "You finally heard me." Every breath caught inside Claire's chest. The voice did not sound frightening. It sounded patient, kind, tired beyond anything she could imagine. She stared at the coffin as countless questions raced through her mind. "Who are you?" she whispered. A quiet chuckle answered from within the ancient stone, followed by words that seemed to awaken the very air surrounding her. "The better question, Claire Bennett, is why you were the only one willing to listen." Claire stood motionless beside the ancient coffin long after the mysterious voice faded into silence. The Hall of Origins felt unchanged, yet everything inside her had shifted. She searched every corner of the chamber, expecting someone to step from behind a pillar and reveal an elaborate prank, but only the quiet glow of the stained glass windows greeted her. The lilies rested peacefully where she had placed them, their white petals untouched, their gentle fragrance drifting through the cool morning air. Nothing about the hall suggested that an impossible conversation had just taken place. She slowly gathered her basket and walked back toward the palace gardens, but every few steps she found herself glancing over her shoulder, wondering if another voice would follow her. Throughout the day, she completed each of her ordinary tasks almost automatically. She watered young rose bushes near the eastern courtyard, polished brass lanterns lining the palace corridors, and helped prepare fresh flowers for the evening prayer. More than once another servant asked if she was feeling well because she seemed unusually distracted. Claire simply smiled and assured them she had not slept very much. It was easier than trying to explain something she barely understood herself. By sunset, the entire palace glowed beneath warm golden light as musicians prepared for the evening meal and noble families gathered inside the grand dining hall. Claire quietly slipped away before anyone noticed her absence. She carried a single lantern and returned alone to the Hall of Origins. At night, the sacred chamber felt entirely different. The towering pillars disappeared into darkness above, while hundreds of small candles surrounded the ancient coffin with soft flickering light. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt as though someone had been patiently waiting for her return. Claire placed the lantern on the marble floor and slowly approached the coffin once more. Her footsteps echoed gently across the vast chamber until she finally stood before the weathered stone. She took a slow breath. Before speaking, I came back. For several moments, nothing happened. The stillness stretched so long that she wondered whether she had imagined everything that morning. Then the familiar voice returned, calm and warm, carrying neither command nor urgency. I knew you would. Claire closed her eyes for a brief moment, partly from relief and partly from disbelief. Who are you? She asked again. You already know the name they gave me. The voice answered softly. But names become stories, and stories often become prisons. Claire frowned as she rested one hand gently against the ancient stone. If you are truly inside this coffin, then everything we have been taught cannot be true. A quiet pause followed before the voice answered. Truth survives longer than memory. It only waits for someone willing to seek it. Claire searched for another question among the countless thoughts racing through her mind. Why can I hear you? The answer came without hesitation. Because you listened before you judged. Every person who entered this hall came searching for confirmation of what they already believed. You arrived expecting nothing except to care for forgotten flowers. Claire looked down at the lilies beside the coffin. Their white blossoms reflected the candlelight with remarkable softness. I am only an omega, she whispered. I do not understand why someone like me would matter. The voice carried unmistakable kindness. The kingdom has spent generations believing greatness belongs only to crowns and titles. They forgot that compassion hears what pride cannot. Claire remained silent, absorbing every word. The voice continued, quieter now, almost as though recalling distant memories. There is a room beneath this hall where history still remembers itself. The people above no longer know it exists. Claire's heartbeat quickened. A hidden room? Yes, it has waited 700 years. She glanced around the enormous chamber, studying every statue, every carved stone, every ancient symbol surrounding the coffin. Nothing appeared unusual. How do I find it? She asked. The answer came slowly. Tomorrow morning, when the first ray of sunlight touches the left eye of the oldest wolf statue, do not look at the statue. Watch its shadow. Before Claire could ask another question, the candles surrounding the coffin flickered gently. The warmth beneath her fingertips faded until the stone felt ordinary once again. The voice had disappeared. She stood alone beneath the silent ceiling, holding tightly to the impossible conversation she knew no one else would believe, while somewhere beneath her feet, an ancient secret patiently waited for the first person in 7 centuries to come searching for the truth. The next morning, Claire barely noticed the cool breeze that swept across the palace gardens as she hurried toward the Hall of Origins with another basket of freshly gathered white lilies resting against her arm. Every word spoken the previous evening echoed clearly inside her thoughts. She had replayed the mysterious instructions countless times throughout the night, wondering whether the voice had truly been real or whether exhaustion had created an impossible dream. Yet the memory of the warmth beneath the ancient stone and the calm kindness carried within every answer refused to fade. As she entered the vast chamber, The familiar silence greeted her once again. The towering wolf statues stood exactly where they always had, watching over the sacred hall with timeless patience. Claire quietly arranged the fresh lilies beside the great coffin before stepping backward to wait. The first rays of sunrise slowly passed through the colorful stained glass windows, filling the marble floor with ribbons of gold, blue, and crimson light. She watched carefully as the sunlight climbed higher until one brilliant beam finally reached the oldest wolf statue standing near the eastern wall. Its left eye shimmered for only a brief moment before the light continued its steady journey across the carved stone. Remembering the voice's instructions, Claire ignored the statue itself and lowered her eyes toward its shadow. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Then, as the sunlight shifted by only a fraction, the shadow stretched across the marble floor and perfectly outlined what looked like the shape of an old doorway. Her breath caught as she slowly followed the shadow to a section of polished stone that appeared no different from the surrounding floor. Kneeling carefully, she brushed away centuries of fine dust gathering along the edges of the stone. Her fingertips discovered a tiny silver symbol almost completely hidden beneath age and neglect. It matched one of the ancient carvings she had seen upon the coffin. Claire gently pressed the symbol. A soft click echoed beneath the floor, followed by a deep mechanical sound that seemed older than memory itself. The marble slab shifted only a few inches before stopping, revealing the edge of a narrow staircase descending into darkness below. Claire looked around the enormous hall, making certain she was completely alone. Her heart raced with equal parts excitement and uncertainty as she lifted her lantern from a nearby table and carefully stepped onto the hidden stairs. Cool air rose from below, carrying the scent of aged parchment, polished cedar, and faint traces of wildflowers that somehow remained fresh despite the passing centuries. The staircase curved gently downward until it opened into a magnificent underground chamber unlike anything Claire had ever imagined. Shelves carved directly into the stone walls held hundreds of carefully preserved books, scrolls, maps, and journals. Crystal lanterns suspended from the ceiling glowed softly without flame, bathing the room in gentle silver light. Ancient banners embroidered with the symbol of the first Alpha remained untouched by time, their colors still vibrant beneath the peaceful illumination. In the center of the chamber stood a large wooden desk crafted from pale oak, covered with neatly arranged writing tools as though someone had only recently stepped away. Nothing appeared abandoned. Everything had been preserved with remarkable care. Claire slowly approached the desk, her footsteps almost reverent against the smooth stone floor. Resting upon the polished surface lay a leather-bound journal secured by a silver clasp shaped like a wolf beneath a full moon. Beside it rested a single folded letter bearing an elegant handwritten inscription. It did not contain the name of a king, a guardian, or a royal council. Instead, it simply read, "For the one who finally chooses to listen." Claire's hands trembled gently as she lifted the letter. Before she could unfold it, another quiet voice echoed through the hidden chamber. This time it did not come from beneath layers of ancient stone. It seemed to surround the room itself, calm, familiar, and filled with quiet hope. History remembers more faithfully than people do, Claire. Begin with the letter. Everything else will make sense afterward. She slowly opened the carefully folded page, unaware that at that same moment, far above in the palace library, the elderly High Keeper Nathaniel Reed paused while organizing forgotten records. A strange warmth spread across an ancient silver pendant hidden beneath his robes, a sensation he had not felt since his earliest days as an apprentice. He looked toward the distant Hall of Origins with quiet concern, whispering to himself, "After all these years, someone has finally found the chamber." Claire unfolded the letter with extraordinary care, afraid that even the gentlest movement might damage paper that had survived 7 centuries beneath the mountain. The handwriting flowed across the page with elegant precision, every stroke calm and deliberate, as though the writer had expected someone to read these words long after his own lifetime had ended. "If these pages have reached your hands," the letter began, "then history has already forgotten what truly happened, and the kingdom has remembered only the version that was easiest to carry." Claire slowly lowered herself into the chair beside the ancient desk, her eyes never leaving the carefully written lines. Do not search for a hero within these words. The letter continued. Search for the truth instead, because truth is the only inheritance that survives every generation. Claire felt a quiet sadness settle inside her as she continued reading. The voice she had heard beneath the stone carried the same patience and warmth as the words before her. Every sentence felt less like a confession and more like a conversation waiting 700 years to begin. The letter explained that memories were fragile, easily reshaped by fear, ambition, and time. Entire kingdoms could honestly believe stories that had never happened if enough years passed without anyone asking difficult questions. Claire slowly raised her eyes toward the shelves surrounding the chamber. Hundreds of carefully preserved journals stood in perfect order. If each contained another piece of forgotten history, then generations had unknowingly built their lives upon only part of the truth. She gently folded the letter and reached for the leather journal resting beside it. The silver clasp opened effortlessly beneath her fingertips. The first page contained no royal seal, no grand declaration, only a simple introduction written in the same elegant hand. My name is Lucian Ashbourne. If you are reading this, then you deserve honesty before you deserve answers. Claire whispered the name to herself. Every child in the kingdom knew the name of the first alpha, yet hearing it written so simply made the legendary figure suddenly feel like a real person rather than an unreachable symbol. She turned the next page. Instead of military victories or glorious ceremonies, the journal described ordinary mornings spent walking through forests, planting young trees after storms, listening to villagers describe their hopes, and believing that rulers served best when they remembered every family by name instead of every battle by date. Claire found herself smiling without realizing it. This was not the distant hero celebrated in grand statues above. This was a thoughtful man who noticed small acts of kindness and considered them the strongest foundation of any kingdom. She continued reading until one passage made her pause. Power always attracts those who admire power, Lucian had written. Compassion attracts those who seek healing. If one day my people must choose between remembering my strength or remembering my kindness, I pray they choose kindness, even if they forget my name. Claire slowly closed the journal, overcome by emotions she struggled to explain. Every lesson she had learned throughout her life described greatness through authority, titles, and victories. Yet the man whose coffin rested above had measured greatness by entirely different standards. A faint glow suddenly appeared near the far side of the chamber. Claire looked up to discover an enormous crystal sphere resting upon an elegant stone pedestal. Moments earlier it had seemed transparent, almost invisible among the surrounding shelves. Now silver light gently flowed through its center like moonlight moving beneath calm water. She approached carefully, captivated by its quiet beauty. As her fingertips lightly touched the crystal surface, soft waves of light spread outward without startling brightness. Slowly, delicate images formed inside the sphere. She saw a younger Lucian walking through green fields with smiling children, kneeling beside elderly villagers to help repair broken fences, laughing as he planted flowering trees beside quiet rivers, and welcoming strangers with genuine warmth instead of royal distance. The memories unfolded peacefully, each one revealing not the legend history had celebrated, but the compassionate heart hidden beneath the crown. Claire watched in complete silence until another memory began to emerge from within the crystal. This time Lucian stood inside the very chamber where she now stood, speaking with an elderly guardian whose silver pendant matched the one worn by High Keeper Nathaniel Reed. Before the conversation became clear, footsteps echoed faintly from the staircase above. Someone had entered the hidden passage. Claire instinctively stepped away from the glowing crystal sphere as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hidden staircase. Every instinct urged her to hide, yet something within the peaceful chamber reminded her that fear had never guided the voice beneath the ancient coffin. A tall elderly man emerged into the room carrying a small lantern whose golden light blended softly with the silver glow surrounding the chamber. His silver hair rested neatly upon his shoulders, and the ceremonial robes he wore bore the unmistakable crest of the High Keeper. Around his neck hung the ancient silver pendant Claire had just seen inside the crystal memory. Nathaniel Reed stopped the moment his eyes met hers. Neither of them spoke for several long seconds. The Silence carried surprise, but not hostility. Finally, Nathaniel looked toward the open journal resting upon the desk before quietly closing his eyes. "So the chamber has chosen someone at last," he said gently. Claire tightened her hands around the folded letter. "You knew this place existed." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "I have known about it since I was a young apprentice. Every high keeper before me swore an oath to protect it until the right person arrived." Claire struggled to understand. "If all of you knew the truth was here, why did no one tell the kingdom?" Nathaniel walked toward the crystal sphere with measured steps, his expression carrying both sorrow and patience. Because protecting truth is not always the same as revealing it. There were generations when the kingdom sought power more than wisdom. If these records had been discovered then, they would have been twisted into another weapon. Claire lowered her eyes toward Lucian's journal. "The voice told me that history remembered only what was easiest to carry." Nathaniel smiled faintly, surprised by her words. "Then you have already spoken with him." Claire looked up immediately. "You believe me?" "I do not merely believe you," Nathaniel answered softly. "I have spent my entire life hoping this day would come." He carefully placed one weathered hand upon the crystal sphere. The silver light brightened, and the peaceful memory inside continued where it had stopped. Claire watched as the younger Lucian stood within this very chamber, speaking calmly with an elderly guardian whose face closely resembled Nathaniel's own grandfather. The guardian appeared troubled, while Lucian remained remarkably serene. His voice flowed from the crystal with perfect clarity. "The kingdom will one day fear uncertainty more than false certainty," Lucian said. "When that day comes, they will build comforting stories instead of asking difficult questions." The guardian replied quietly, "Then let us correct them now." Lucian slowly shook his head. "No. Truth forced upon unwilling hearts becomes another burden. Truth discovered through compassion becomes wisdom." The memory shifted to another moment. Lucian stood beside the enormous stone coffin that now rested above in the Hall of Origins. There was no sign of fear upon his face, only peaceful resolve. "Seal this chamber," he instructed. "Seal the coffin as well. Not to imprison me, but to protect the promise we have made." The guardian hesitated. "How long should the seal remain?" Lucian smiled gently, the same warmth Claire had heard within the mysterious voice beneath the stone. "Until someone arrives who listens before asking for power. Until someone values kindness above titles. That person will understand what even kings sometimes forget." The memory slowly dissolved into shimmering silver light. Claire remained speechless as countless pieces of the mystery finally began fitting together. Nathaniel folded his hands before him. Every high keeper inherited only fragments of his final instructions. "We were told never to break the seal ourselves because the seal was never meant to respond to authority." Claire looked toward the staircase leading back to the Hall of Origins. "Then why did the voice call to me?" Nathaniel met her eyes with complete certainty. "Because the seal has recognized exactly what Lucian believed would still exist after 700 years. Genuine compassion." Before Claire could answer, the silver pendant around Nathaniel's neck suddenly began glowing with the same gentle light filling the chamber. At that exact moment, somewhere directly above them, a deep, resonant hum echoed through the Hall of Origins as ancient runes carved across the first Alpha's stone coffin awakened one by one for the first time in 7 centuries. And both Claire and Nathaniel realized that the promise Lucian had left behind was no longer waiting for the future. It had already begun. Claire and Nathaniel hurried up the hidden staircase together, the ancient chamber quietly sealing itself behind them as though it wished to remain invisible a little longer. The moment they stepped back into the Hall of Origins, both of them stopped in silent amazement. Fine silver light flowed across the surface of the first Alpha's stone coffin, tracing every carved rune with a soft radiance that had not appeared for 700 years. The light was gentle rather than overwhelming, moving like calm water beneath moonlight. The white lilies Claire had placed beside the coffin earlier that morning seemed almost luminous within the peaceful glow. Nathaniel slowly removed his glasses and stared at the ancient monument with eyes filled not with fear, but with profound gratitude. "I have waited my entire life to witness this," he whispered. Claire looked toward him. "What happens now?" Nathaniel rested one hand against the cool stone floor. "The seal has begun responding. That means the promise Lucian entrusted to time has accepted its rightful keeper." Before Claire could answer, distant footsteps echoed from the entrance of the hall. Palace attendants entered carrying fresh candles for the evening ceremony, but they immediately froze when they noticed the glowing runes. Within moments, whispers spread through the chamber. One attendant hurried away to inform the royal council, while another knelt in silent prayer, uncertain whether they were witnessing a miracle or something they had never been taught to understand. Claire instinctively stepped back from the coffin, worried that every eye would soon turn toward her, but Nathaniel quietly shook his head. "Do not hide," he said gently. "You have done nothing except listen." The silver light continued spreading across the ancient carvings until one final symbol near the center of the coffin awakened with remarkable clarity. A soft chime echoed through the hall, not loud enough to frighten anyone, but beautiful enough that every conversation immediately stopped. The sound carried through the palace corridors like the ringing of a distant bell, welcoming the beginning of a forgotten celebration. Members of the royal council soon arrived wearing elaborate ceremonial robes. Their expressions revealed confusion rather than certainty as they slowly surrounded the sacred coffin without touching it. The eldest counselor carefully examined the glowing runes before turning toward Nathaniel. "Has someone interfered with the seal?" Nathaniel answered with complete calm. "No one has broken it." The counselor frowned. "Then why has it awakened?" Nathaniel looked briefly toward Claire before returning his attention to the gathering. "Because the time appointed long ago has finally arrived." Murmurs immediately spread among the council members. Some searched ancient carvings for explanations, while others debated forgotten traditions that none of them fully remembered. Claire remained silent, recalling Lucian's words from the hidden chamber. Truth discovered through compassion became wisdom. Truth forced upon unwilling hearts became another burden. She realized this moment was unfolding exactly as he had foreseen centuries earlier. No argument could convince those who were not yet ready to listen. Only the truth itself could. As evening settled beyond the stained glass windows, the silver glow surrounding the coffin gradually grew brighter until delicate lines of light extended across the marble floor in the shape of an ancient circle that had remained hidden beneath centuries of polished stone. Nathaniel quietly smiled, recognizing the forgotten design from records preserved inside the secret chamber. He turned toward Claire with quiet certainty. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "the final seal will ask for only one thing. Not strength, not authority, only the same compassion that allowed you to hear the first knock. When that moment comes, everything the kingdom believes about its past will finally be remembered as it truly was." The following morning, the Hall of Origins welcomed more visitors than it had in many years. Word of the glowing runes had traveled across the palace before sunrise, drawing scholars, council members, royal guards, and curious servants into the vast chamber. Yet despite the growing crowd, an unusual stillness lingered in the air. No one spoke above a whisper. The ancient coffin remained at the center of the hall, surrounded by the circle of silver light that had emerged from beneath the marble floor during the previous evening. The gentle radiance neither faded nor intensified. It simply waited. Claire stood quietly beside Nathaniel near the edge of the glowing circle, feeling the eyes of countless strangers occasionally drift toward her before turning away again. She did not understand why the voice had chosen her, and she had no desire for recognition. She only wanted to understand the promise Lucian had protected for 7 centuries. Nathaniel looked toward the assembled council before speaking calmly. "No ritual recorded within our archives can open what stands before us today. The final seal answers to no title, no rank, and no command." Several council members exchanged uncertain glances. One elderly scholar stepped forward carrying an ornate ceremonial staff engraved with ancient symbols. He respectfully touched its polished end against the outer edge of the glowing circle. Nothing changed. The silver light remained perfectly still. Another council member quietly recited words from one of the oldest surviving royal ceremonies. Again, the hall answered only with peaceful silence. Claire remembered Lucian's journal. He had written that compassion reached places authority never could. As the unsuccessful attempts continued, she slowly walked toward the white lilies resting beside the coffin. Their petals remained remarkably fresh despite several days having passed. She gently removed one blossom that had begun to wilt and replaced it with a newly opened flower from the small basket she still carried every morning. The simple act felt familiar, comforting, and entirely ordinary. She smiled softly as she adjusted the arrangement so every stem faced the morning sunlight. "Thank you for waiting," she whispered, not knowing whether she was speaking to the flowers, the ancient hall, or the patient voice beneath the stone. The instant those quiet words left her lips, the silver circle beneath the coffin shimmered with renewed brilliance. A wave of gentle light flowed outward across the marble floor, passing harmlessly beneath everyone gathered inside the chamber. The air filled with a warm, peaceful glow, and delicate silver particles drifted slowly downward like tiny stars carried upon an invisible breeze. Every conversation stopped. Every face turned toward Claire. Nathaniel smiled with quiet certainty. "There it is," he whispered. "Not power. Gratitude." Claire looked around in surprise as the carved runes across the stone coffin brightened together for the first time. The enormous lid did not move, yet the heavy silence surrounding it seemed to dissolve. Then the familiar voice echoed gently through the hall, clear enough that everyone present could finally hear it. "Kindness has always been the final key." Gasps spread through the gathering, yet no fear followed. The voice carried only warmth, wisdom, and remarkable peace. Even the council members lowered their heads with quiet respect. Nathaniel placed one hand over the glowing pendant resting against his chest. Tears gathered in his eyes as he softly said, "The kingdom is finally ready to remember." At the center of the hall, a narrow beam of golden morning sunlight passed through the highest stained glass window and settled directly upon the ancient coffin. The silver runes answered with one final pulse of gentle light, and a quiet sound echoed throughout the chamber as the first ancient seal released itself, signaling that the long-awaited awakening had already begun. The gentle pulse of silver light slowly faded, leaving the Hall of Origins wrapped in a peaceful silence unlike anything anyone present had ever experienced. No one moved. No one dared interrupt the sacred stillness that seemed to settle over every stone, every pillar, and every beam of morning sunlight. Claire stood beside the ancient coffin with her hands quietly folded before her, her heart beating steadily as though it already knew what was about to happen. Nathaniel lowered his head respectfully, while every member of the royal council instinctively stepped backward, leaving an open space around the glowing monument. The enormous stone lid remained perfectly still for several long moments. Then a soft sound echoed through the chamber, not the grinding of heavy stone against stone, but the delicate release of ancient mechanisms fulfilling a promise they had faithfully guarded for 7 centuries. Thin lines of silver light traced every carved rune one final time before gradually dissolving into the smooth surface of the coffin. A warm breeze drifted through the hall, although every great door remained closed. The white lilies beside the monument gently swayed as though welcoming an old friend. Home. Slowly, almost gracefully, the massive stone lid began to move. There was no force, no violence, only quiet purpose. Every eye remained fixed upon the opening coffin as golden morning light poured gently inside. Claire felt neither fear nor uncertainty. Instead, she experienced an overwhelming sense of familiarity, as though this moment had been patiently waiting for her long before she had ever entered the Hall of Origins carrying her first basket of flowers. As the opening widened, a calm silver glow emerged from within, softer than moonlight, yet brighter than any candle. The light gradually faded, revealing a man peacefully resting inside. His long silver hair framed a noble face untouched by age. His white skin appeared healthy, his expression serene, as though he had merely fallen asleep beneath the afternoon sun instead of resting through 700 passing years. His elegant silver robes remained immaculate, embroidered with ancient symbols identical to those hidden throughout the secret chamber below. For several quiet moments, nothing happened. Then Lucian Ashbourne slowly opened his silver eyes. He drew one calm breath, blinking gently as he adjusted to the sunlight filling the hall. His first expression was not confusion. It was gratitude. He slowly sat upright, looking around the chamber with peaceful recognition before his gaze finally rested upon Claire. A warm smile appeared upon his face, carrying the same kindness she had heard within the mysterious voice beneath the stone. "You listened," he said softly. Claire felt tears gather in her eyes before she even realized she was smiling back. I almost thought I imagined your voice, she answered quietly. Lucian shook his head with gentle amusement. Kind hearts often doubt themselves before they trust what they hear. He slowly stepped from the coffin, his movements graceful and unhurried, as though every step honored the passing centuries rather than resisted them. The gathered crowd instinctively lowered their heads. Some knelt in reverence, while others simply watched in silent amazement, unable to reconcile the living man before them with the distant legend they had always known. Nathaniel stepped forward with quiet emotion shining across his face. "Welcome home, my king," he whispered. Lucian gently placed one hand upon Nathaniel's shoulder before looking around the hall once more. His eyes rested briefly upon the council members, the ancient statues, the stained glass windows, and finally the fresh white lilies Claire had lovingly placed beside the coffin every morning. His smile deepened with quiet satisfaction. "The kingdom remembered the flowers," he said softly. "That means hope survived even when memory did not." As warm sunlight continued to fill the Hall of Origins, every person present understood they were witnessing not the return of forgotten power, but the quiet fulfillment of a promise built upon compassion, patience, and the simple courage of one young Omega who had chosen to listen when everyone else had only believed. Warm sunlight continued pouring through the stained glass windows as the Hall of Origins slowly transformed from a place of silent remembrance into a place where living truth finally stood before the kingdom once again. No one rushed to speak. No one celebrated with loud voices. The quiet carried far greater meaning than applause ever could. Lucian Ashbourne looked upon every face gathered before him with calm compassion, recognizing neither strangers nor subjects, only people who had inherited an incomplete story. He slowly walked toward the center of the hall, where Claire remained standing with quiet humility, still holding the small basket that had become part of her morning routine for so many years. She lowered her eyes respectfully, believing the first alpha deserved every honor that could be offered. Instead, Lucian stopped before her and gently smiled. Without hesitation, the legendary king slowly lowered himself onto one knee before the young Omega. A wave of astonishment swept across the hall. Members of the royal council stared in disbelief. Royal guards exchanged silent glances. Even Nathaniel closed his eyes for a brief moment as tears of gratitude filled them. Claire stepped back in surprise. "My king, please do not kneel before me," she said softly. Lucian looked up at her with peaceful, silver eyes that reflected neither authority nor pride. "A crown does not make gratitude unnecessary," he replied. "For 700 years, countless people stood before my resting place, searching for greatness, power, or glory. You came carrying flowers. You asked for nothing. You listened before you judged. You chose kindness before certainty. That is why the promise awakened for you." Claire felt emotion welling within her heart as she quietly answered, "I only wanted to care for a place everyone else had forgotten." Lucian smiled warmly. "And because you cared for what others overlooked, the kingdom has remembered itself." He slowly rose to his feet before turning toward the gathered council and the many citizens who had quietly entered the hall. "Let no one measure another soul by title, rank, or birth," he said with calm conviction. The future of this kingdom was never restored by the strongest voice in the room. It was restored by the gentlest heart willing to listen. The words settled deeply within every person present. Several council members lowered their heads in quiet reflection. Others looked toward Claire with newfound respect, realizing that history had changed because compassion had succeeded where authority had failed. Nathaniel carefully brought forward Lucian's journal and placed it upon the ancient stone beside the white lilies. "The truth has returned," he said peacefully. Lucian nodded. "Then let it remain open for every generation that follows, so memory will never again become separated from kindness." As the morning light filled every corner of the Hall of Origins, the ancient runes upon the opened coffin gradually faded into ordinary stone, their purpose finally fulfilled. The hidden chamber below would no longer guard forgotten secrets, but preserved wisdom, and the kingdom entered a new beginning built not upon legends alone, but upon truth discovered through compassion. If this story reminded you that genuine strength is found in kindness, please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss future journeys of courage and destiny. Leave a like if Claire's compassion touched your heart. Share this story with someone who believes hope can change the world. And tell us in the comments what moment moved you the most, and whether you believe kindness can awaken even the oldest forgotten promises.